To get a free market perspective on net neutrality, I was joined earlier by David Henderson. David is a professor of economics at the Naval Postgraduate School and a research fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institute. Take a look at what he had to say. David, as you know, President Obama has come out in support of net neutrality. Now, you're against it, and I want to play a clip from our interview back in May where you shared why specifically you were against it. Take a look at this.
Net neutrality is a bad idea. The whole idea that people who use something in greater degree should pay the same who use something in less degree doesn't make sense. If I go to a restaurant and I order 2 steaks, I should pay more than you who ordered 1 steak. And it's the same kind of...
David, I take it that you are still anti-net neutrality, no?
Yes, and the reasoning is similar. Let me just add, besides that, what you just played, and by the way, I might call that menu neutrality, right? It would be like requiring everyone to have a buffet style where you take as much as you want, but everyone pays the same. It's also that net neutrality dictates a certain kind of business model, and we don't know, no one knows, not just economists, people don't know, what are the best business setups, what are the, what's the best way to set those up. Those things evolve, and businesses, customers, and so on will evolve with them. They will figure out what are the best ways, and imposing net neutrality prevents other kinds of business models from emerging.
Okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. Let me give you my own provocative analogy here. Let's say that you're a toll road owner for a sometimes high-trafficked road network, and you tell your toll booth operators to stiff out heavy users at the toll booths, and they identified trucks from this one specific company, and you put them all in slow lanes at the toll booths, where you tell them basically either pay more money and we'll put you in the easy pass lane, or stay in this slow lane. Mind you, they're already paying the standard rate per vehicle that everyone else is paying, but now you want them to pay even more, or you're going to slow them down. Isn't that extortion?
It's not extortion because it's a voluntary transaction, but also more important, I don't think that's very likely. And it's not likely for 2 reasons. One, it's been very hard to find evidence that that kind of thing has been happening. And the second is there are competitors. So competitors will always constrain companies' ability to do that kind of thing.
Well, actually, that leads well into my next question, because you see, what I'm getting at is, with that example that I just gave you, is that when you have 96% of American homes with 2 or fewer broadband fixed-line internet choices, you have a situation where ISPs have a lot of power, and discriminating on price between customers based on traffic levels, it becomes a regulatory issue. So how should regulators keep companies from abusing their market power?
I don't accept your premise. I don't think that becomes a regulatory issue. Let me take an example from the transportation industry. We have essentially 2 railroads in this country, Burlington Northern and Southern Pacific, and those railroads are competing head-to-head. They're competing vigorously. Bob Crandall, an economist at Brookings Institution, has talked about this. There's intense competition when you have 2 competitors, often.
Okay, well, what do you think of energy deregulation, where states have given residents a choice in gas and electricity providers? Could that be a similar model that works for broadband as well?
It could be. I'm not as familiar with energy deregulation, but it could be, yes.
Okay, now, David, you've been writing a lot about Thomas Piketty's and income inequality, his whole book on that. So what's your basic argument there?
Oh, it's many-fold. I'll tell you the big one. It's an almost 700-page book. And when you work your way through it, as I did, and read every footnote as I did, you will not find him saying much about why inequality is bad. He just takes it as given that it's bad. And by the way, at times he confuses inequality with poverty, with people being worse off. So he actually has a section where he talks about inequality increasing and people being worse off. In fact, the story of free markets, the story of economic growth in the 19th and 20th centuries is everyone rising, but rising at different rates. Related to that, Robert Solow, who made a very positive review of the book in New Republic, admitted that if Piketty got his way and we highly taxed wealth and we highly taxed income, even more than the government does now, there'd be less capital formation. Sola pointed out you might have more equality, but there'll be less capital formation. Why does that matter? Because the lower the amount of capital per worker, the less productive our workers, and then the lower their wages. So is it really worth sacrificing standards of living for people at the bottom and the middle in order to get more equality?
So, David, you don't think that income inequality is a bad thing, do you?
I don't think it's bad per se. Whether it's bad depends on what it results from. So let me give you a plausible scenario. A bunch of people persuade the government to give them monopolies in various areas, and they make a lot of money, and the average consumer loses out because prices are higher. You'll get potentially more income inequality, and that'll be bad. But let me give you another scenario, which is really the story of free markets. Someone figures out some new production process or some new good, makes a lot of money on it, say Apple, something like that. Millions and millions and millions of consumers gain. The few people who own shares in Apple and who own a lot of shares in Apple have much higher income, much more wealth. They're better off. Income inequality and wealth inequality increase, and everyone's better off. That's not bad. That's good.
So, David, do you think the American middle class is better off today than it was 15 or 20 years ago?
I do. I think it's clear cut. And one way to look at that, people often look at incomes and they adjust for inflation using the consumer price index. Well, one of my colleagues here at Hoover, Mike Boskin, showed back in the 90s that the consumer price index overstates the inflation rate by almost a percentage point a year. That compounds over 20 years, and so what looks like lower real income is really somewhat higher real income. That's one way to look at it. And the other way is just to kind of look around you. Look at the clothing we wear. Look at the travel we can afford now. And I'm talking middle class people, not just upper class people. Look at the cell phones we have. Look at all the free entertainment we have. Look at Hulu. Look at all these things. Look at the web. And you'll see people are generally better off.
David, in the midterms, just 1% of voters polled felt that the economy was excellent, and about 70% said that the economy was not so good or poor. So where do you think all this angst is coming from?
That it is not so good or poor. In other words, given all I've said, I'm saying over a long run we've done better, but we've had a very slow recovery, an unusually slow recovery from a recession. And I think it's all of the regulation that came along with it that has slowed the recovery. I think Obamacare has slowed the recovery. The minimum wage going up back in July 2009 slowed the recovery. So there are multiple factors that made the recovery slower. And I think people, even if they aren't identifying that as the cause, are seeing the effects.
That was David Henderson, economics professor and research fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institute. Time now for a very quick break, but stick around because when we return, RT correspondent Lindsay France will be on the show. Lindsay is telling us what's behind Taylor Swift's decision to drop the music streaming service Spotify and what it means for both the tech and music industries. And economist and Citadel professor Richard Ebeling will be on the show to talk about Austrian economics. Now, as we head to break, here are a look at some of your closing numbers at the bell. Come on back with us.